My twin brother appeared at my door beaten and terrified. What he asked me to do changed everything. Hi, I'm Nick, 31, and the day my twin brother showed up at my door covered in bruises was the day I stopped being the quiet one. He looked like he'd been in a bar brawl with a baseball bat and lost. Split lip, black eye, ribs he couldn't touch without wincing, and a look in his eyes like he hadn't slept or felt safe in months. Ethan had always been the more diplomatic of the two of us, the charming one, the guy who could defuse a fight with a grin. So when he asked me to switch places with him for a few weeks, to take his life, his home, and his identity while he escaped from the hell he'd been surviving in, I didn't ask twice. Ethan had married Kristen 5 years earlier. On the surface, they were suburban storybook, good job, cute kid, 2-story home with a fenced-in yard. But the fine print? Her brothers. Blake and Craig. 2 slabs of testosterone and bad judgment wrapped in button-ups and aggression. The kind of guys who mistake cruelty for bonding and intimidation for love. They'd been tormenting Ethan for over a year. At first it was mockery, calling him soft, a beta, a pencil pusher. Then it turned into surprise visits, barking orders in his own home, raiding the fridge, changing the TV while his daughter Sophie was trying to watch her dinosaur cartoons. Kristen said nothing. Sometimes she even laughed. Eventually it escalated to violence. Blake used his fists like punctuation. Craig played the sidekick, holding Ethan down and whispering threats about custody and what judges believe when a man tries to cry abuse. They were smart. Body shots, mostly. Nothing too visible. But they didn't count on Ethan having a twin with a bad temper, a decent plan, and nothing left to lose. I moved into Ethan's life like I was born for it. We were identical down to the scar on our left eyebrow from that one bike crash in '97. I memorized his routines, talked to his daughter about her favorite dinosaurs, Mr. Stumpy, obviously, made dinner like he did, even wore his damn slippers. Then I waited. And when Blake walked in that first night, didn't even knock, just strutted in and grabbed a beer like he was entitled to it? I smiled. And pressed record. Blake was bigger than me, than Ethan, but not smarter. Or careful. He rolled in like he owned the place, cracking jokes about real men, and mocking the leftovers I was heating up. What is this, quinoa? Jesus, you marketing types really are soft. I hunched my shoulders and played the part. Gave him the same quiet deference Ethan had described. Let him puff his chest and belittle me for 20 minutes. He shoved me into the fridge door once, hard enough to hurt but not enough to leave a mark. I stumbled, apologized, eyes low. Inside, I was already lining up the angles for the hallway camera. When Kristen got home, Blake flipped the switch. Suddenly he was Mr. Concerned Brother, asking how her day was and if she needed help with groceries. The condescending wink he gave me behind her back nearly made me lunge across the counter. But I didn't. I smiled and rinsed the plates. This was about building the case. 7 weeks, Ethan had asked? I gave him 9. Every visit, I had the camera running. Every shove, every insult, every manipulative whisper caught on audio. When Craig started dropping in on Saturdays, I played dumb while he poked into our finances and suggested that maybe Sophie needs stronger male role models. He said it smiling. I logged it under threatening implications. I documented everything. I had spreadsheets, synced cloud backups, audio logs, timestamps, screenshots. It wasn't just evidence, it was a slow-burning fuse. By week 5, I had bruises to match Ethan's. By week 6, I had video of Blake pinning me against the garage wall, spitting in my face, saying I was lucky he didn't break my jaw. Craig stood behind the camera's line of sight, arms folded like a bouncer at a back alley fight club. Kristen? She asked once about the bruises on my ribs. I said I slipped on the stairs. She nodded, turned back to her phone. But that was fine. I didn't need her to see. Because the day of reckoning was already on the calendar. Frank and Patricia, Kristen's parents, were throwing a big family dinner. Anniversary. 40 years of marital bliss. Blake and Craig would be there. Everyone would. So would a projector. And a USB stick. And 2 uniformed officers waiting in the driveway for my signal. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to ruin them in the most public, humiliating way possible. The night of the dinner, I wore Ethan's gray button-down and his nervous smile. Kristen was glowing in some pastel number, arm looped through mine like nothing in her life was falling apart. Sophie skipped ahead in her dinosaur sneakers, completely unaware that tonight would change everything. Frank and Patricia's house was packed. Balloons, catered food, relatives in every corner. The brothers were already holding court in the living room, beers in hand, loud, obnoxious, smug as ever. When they saw me, Blake gave me that familiar smirk. Look who finally grew a spine and showed up. Craig raised his beer. Nice shirt, Ethan. Try not to spill anything on it tonight. I nodded. You guys look comfortable. Then I walked over to Frank. Do you mind if I say a few words after dinner? I put together a slideshow. Of course, he said, clapping me on the back. Glad you're stepping up. Dinner was predictable. Too much noise. Too many people pretending this family wasn't a cracked windshield held together by denial. After dessert, Frank tapped a spoon against a wine glass and gave a sweet, rambling toast about love and longevity. Everyone applauded politely. Then I stood up. Hey, I'd like to share something too, I said, holding up a small remote. About what it means to protect the people you love. The TV flickered to life. The first clip played. Blake entering the house without knocking, grabbing food, shoving Ethan against the wall and barking insults. Crystal clear audio. Perfect angle. No ambiguity. The room went silent. Clip 2, Craig in the garage, holding me down while Blake punched. Craig laughing. Gotta make sure the little beta knows his place. A gasp from Patricia. Frank dropped his fork. Clip 3, Craig leaning in, smiling. What would happen if Sophie had a little accident? Kids are so fragile, man. The fourth clip showed Blake mocking Kristen's cooking, saying she only married Ethan because she couldn't land a real man. Kristen went pale. She had no idea that clip existed. 12 minutes. That's how long it took to detonate an entire family. When the screen went dark, I said calmly, These two men have been systematically abusing Ethan for over a year. And you all, every single one of you, let it happen. You looked away. You made excuses. You handed your loyalty to two monsters because they made you laugh at cookouts. Blake jumped up. You're making this up. This is out of context. I stared at him. Explain the context where it's fine to beat your sister's husband and threaten his daughter. Craig turned to Frank. Dad, come on. Frank didn't move. His face was stone. Should I call them in? I asked. Kristen whispered. Call who? I nodded toward the door. 2 officers entered. Calm. Collected. One of them held a folder. Blake Sanderson? Craig Sanderson? You're under arrest for assault, criminal threats, trespassing, and harassment. The cuffs clicked louder than the silence in the room. Blake's eyes went wide. We'll ruin you. He hissed at me. You're dead. I smiled. I'm not Ethan. His face crumpled with confusion. Too late. The confusion hit Blake like a slap. I'm not Ethan. I repeated, stepping forward. I'm Nick. His twin. The one you forgot existed. He froze. Looked around the room like he could reverse time. Craig looked sick, already pale and sweating under the overhead lights. Their parents just stared, like someone had flipped the entire axis of their world without warning. I've been living as Ethan for the last 9 weeks, I said. I took every shove, every insult, every threat. And I recorded all of it. Kristen's mouth moved but no sound came out. The bruises you ignored? That was me. The officer stepped in and started reading Miranda rights. Blake kept yelling. This is illegal. You can't impersonate him. This is fraud. One of the cops replied deadpan. We're not arresting the twin brother. We're arresting 2 grown men who spent a year turning someone's home into a war zone. Craig muttered something about lawyers and defamation, but the second officer shut him up with a firm. Save it for the arraignment. They were led out in cuffs, past stunned relatives, down the driveway where their SUVs sat like forgotten trophies of their dominance. Nobody followed. Nobody protested. The room was dead quiet. Then Kristen stood. Her voice shook. You lied to me. I nodded. Your husband came to me beaten and scared. He couldn't take another day. And you didn't even ask him once what was wrong. You just let it happen. You're just his brother. She snapped, voice cracking. You don't know our marriage. No, I said, looking her dead in the eye. But I know abuse when I see it. And I know what it looks like when someone chooses comfort over truth. Frank and Patricia sat frozen. Patricia was crying softly now. Frank looked like he'd aged 10 years in one evening. I've already filed for Ethan's divorce, I added. Sole custody. Full protection orders. Your husband will never be in the same room as those men again. Kristen dropped into her chair stunned. Sophie, thankfully staying with a babysitter that night, would never see those men again. That much I would guarantee. I turned to the room. I'll be in the car. If anyone wants to apologize, call Ethan. But don't expect him to answer right away. Then I walked out of that house like a ghost leaving the scene of a fire. One I lit. One they all helped start. Kristen moved out 2 days later. Not by court order. Not yet. Just a quiet, tense departure with 2 suitcases, red-rimmed eyes, and her mother's minivan waiting out front. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say anything. The house felt different the second she was gone. Ethan came back a week after the dinner. Still limping a little. Still checking over his shoulder in parking lots. But he walked into his own home with a look I'll never forget, fear and relief fused into disbelief. He looked around like someone stepping into a dream they were scared to wake from. The first thing he did? Hugged Sophie so tight she squealed. Then he sat on the couch and cried. Not the quiet, cinematic tears. The ugly kind. Shoulders shaking, breath hiccuping, years of shame and pain finally exhaled. I stood in the kitchen and let him have the space. Some things you don't interrupt. He moved into a new apartment across town shortly after. 1 bedroom. Safe. Cozy. I helped him install a keypad lock, motion lights, and a camera on the door. The kind of home where the door only opens for love. We started transferring everything. The joint accounts? Closed. Sophie's school info? Updated. Custody paperwork? Filed. Kristen lawyered up, of course, but we'd already hired a firm. The evidence was airtight. Her complicity, her silence, her failure to act, it was all on record. I'll never forget the look on her face during mediation when the judge asked her, flatly. You saw the bruises and didn't ask why. She tried to cry. The judge wasn't moved. Sole custody granted. Kristen would get supervised visitation. Twice a month. At a center. With a caseworker present. Ethan hugged me in the parking lot afterward. He said, You gave me my life back. I said, No. You let me borrow it long enough to fight for it. That week, we burned the old footage onto backup drives and locked them in a safe. Just in case. But the real closure came when Sophie, sitting cross-legged in Ethan's new apartment, looked up and said, Daddy, can we stay here forever? It's quiet. It was the quiet that saved him. And the noise that damned everyone else. News travels fast when it's ugly and true. 3 days after the arrests, a clip from the dinner slideshow leaked. Someone had filmed it on their phone. It showed Blake pushing me into a wall, clear as crystal, audio uncensored. It went viral faster than any of us were ready for. Local news. Then Reddit. Then a segment on a national morning show about domestic abuse in men, and how often it's dismissed. The irony? For the first time in his life, Ethan was finally seen. Kristen's employer saw it too. A medical billing office isn't exactly thrilled to be connected to a woman who enabled 2 violent felons and lied by omission for over a year. HR called it a disruption to professional integrity. Translation: she was fired before lunch. Blake and Craig? They didn't fare much better. Even before the trials began, both lost their jobs. Blake's construction firm restructured, and Craig's sales firm terminated his contract for ethics violations. I doubt either will be hired again outside a bait shop or a billboard for anger management. Their mugshots made the rounds. But my favorite image was the one of the 2 of them, in matching orange, sitting side by side in court while the charges were read aloud. Assault. Battery. Criminal threats. Trespassing. Child endangerment. I had printed copies of everything, laid out like a prosecutor's dream buffet. Kristen's lawyer tried to argue she wasn't aware, that she was just caught between loyalties. I brought out her group texts. The messages where she laughed at Ethan's melodrama and told Craig, he'll get over it. He always does. The judge wasn't amused. In court, Ethan didn't say much. He didn't need to. His body told the story. The medical reports told the rest. I spoke on his behalf once, during sentencing. I said, Men don't stop asking for help because they're stubborn. They stop because no one listens when they do. My brother asked me once. And I listened. Now these men get to listen to the law. Blake got 18 months in county jail. Craig got 14. Both with mandatory anger management, probation, and zero contact with Ethan or Sophie. Kristen cried in court. But not for Ethan. For her reputation. And just like that, the wolves lost their teeth. After the sentencing, everything felt like it exhaled. The air in Ethan's apartment wasn't heavy anymore. Sophie laughed louder. Ethan stood straighter. The man who walked around with ghosts in his chest now whistled while doing dishes. Healing didn't come in a rush, it came in small, stubborn pieces. But for me? I couldn't shake the rage. I'd lived in his skin. Felt the humiliation. Took the punches. Wore the mask. And now that it was over, the anger had nowhere to go. It just sat inside me like old smoke in a sealed room. Then the letter came. Not a text. Not an email. A physical letter in a fancy envelope, thick cardstock, embossed initials, too much perfume. Kristen's mother. Patricia. It said. We didn't know, Nick. If we had, we would have done something. But now you've taken everything from Kristen, her marriage, her job, her dignity. I hope you're satisfied. I read it. Folded it. And fed it into Ethan's shredder while Sophie watched cartoons in dinosaur pajamas. Then I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. She thinks you lost something, I said. He was quiet a moment. Then, she's half right. I lost fear. That night, Ethan came over. We sat on my balcony with beers and no agenda. Just breathing. You know, he said. When we were kids, I always thought I'd be the one protecting you. I smirked. You still might. Just not from people who punch. We didn't talk about the past. Not in detail. It was behind us now. The courts had ruled. The locks were changed. The cameras were packed away. But Ethan looked at me and said, You gave me a future. No, I told him. I gave you back your now. And it hit me, finally, that I wasn't angry anymore. I was done carrying their sins. And finally ready to put them down. It should have ended there. But abuse doesn't just stop because the bruises do. One evening, Ethan called me. Not panicked. Calm. Too calm. She showed up, he said. Kristen. At the park. During my pickup with Sophie. I was already grabbing my keys. By the time I got there, Kristen was leaning against her car, arms crossed, eyes puffy. Sophie was safe, off with the caseworker, oblivious, chasing butterflies like kids do when they're lucky enough to forget pain. Kristen didn't yell. Didn't beg. She just looked hollow. I just wanted to see her, she said. Without supervision. For 5 minutes. Just to talk to my daughter like a normal mom. I stared at her. You forfeited normal a long time ago. She asked about Blake. She said softly. Said he was funny. She misses him. I felt something ice-cold creep into my spine. She remembers the man who gave her candy and loud jokes. I said. Not the one who used her dad as a punching bag when she wasn't looking. Kristen flinched. I didn't know what to do. She said. They're my brothers. And he was your husband. I snapped. Your daughter's father. And you let him bleed alone because conflict made you uncomfortable. I was scared. She cried. No, I said. You were complicit. She looked at me, really looked. You're not him. You're colder. Harder. I didn't blink. You made him that way. She reached into her purse, pulled out a tiny envelope. This is for Sophie. When she's older. Please. I took it. I didn't promise to give it to her. I didn't promise anything. Then I said, Go home, Kristen. And stay away. You don't get to rewrite this story now. She left. Quietly. Finally. I turned to see Ethan sitting on a bench, watching Sophie play. He looked tired. But at peace. Like a man who could finally afford to be soft again. And I realized, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair. Ethan's apartment was small, clean, and for the first time, his. No voices barging in. No unpredictable explosions. No brothers with keys they didn't earn. He painted the walls himself. Soft blue. Sophie picked the color. Because it feels like the sky when the clouds are friendly, she said, and that was all the reason he needed. I helped him build shelves. We installed a dinosaur nightlight in her room, Mr. Stumpy, of course, now standing watch from a tiny bookcase lined with picture books and scribbled drawings. The custody schedule was working. Sophie adjusted faster than anyone expected. Kids know when they're safe. They bloom in it. And Ethan, he was starting to laugh again. The real kind, not the nervous chuckle that hid bruises and dread. We celebrated the court victory with takeout and juice boxes. No champagne. No Instagram story. Just quiet dignity. He started therapy. Twice a week. At first, he hated it. Then, slowly, he didn't. I thought being strong meant pretending it didn't happen, he told me once. Turns out being strong is saying it did, and I lived through it anyway. Kristen texted once. A picture of Sophie from a year ago, wearing a princess costume and sitting on Blake's shoulders. The message said, "Please don't erase the good memories." Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he printed out a picture of Sophie holding Mr. Stompy under the sun at the park last weekend and pinned it to his fridge. A new memory. He was done grieving the life he thought he had. He was building the one he chose. 3 months passed. The bruises faded. The nightmares didn't. Not completely. Ethan still flinched sometimes when he heard a door slam too hard. Sophie still asked, "Is Uncle Blake in trouble?" Like she was trying to figure out if she should feel scared or sad. But healing was happening, in layers, in pieces. Ethan started a support group. 5 guys, all different backgrounds, same quiet shame. Some had been pushed. Some had been punched. All had been told it wasn't abuse because they were men. He called it the unseen room. Every Thursday, they sat in a circle at the community center and talked. No judgment. No hierarchy. Just one rule: you speak, you get to be heard. The first night, only one guy spoke. The second week, they all did. Ethan smiled when he told me that. "It's wild," he said. "They look at me like I did something brave. But I only did what you did for me." I shook my head. "You survived. I just held the door open." Meanwhile, Kristen stayed quiet. The court's protection order held. No contact except through legal channels. Sophie saw her twice, supervised. Neutral site, beige walls, 1-hour windows. Ethan didn't interfere. He didn't poison Sophie's view. He just told the truth, age appropriate, and let his daughter decide what to carry. The last supervised visit ended with Sophie saying, "Can I go home now?" That word, home, had weight now. It meant safety. One day, Ethan came by my place. Brought tacos. Said he had something to show me. It was a tattoo. Small. Left shoulder blade. A triceratops. "Mr. Stompy," he said, half laughing, half choked up. "She asked me to get it. Said it was so he'd always protect me too." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Because that stupid cartoon dinosaur meant one thing. Sophie knew. She knew who the hero was. By the time fall rolled in, Ethan wasn't just surviving anymore, he was building. He started a new job. Smaller agency, better hours. The CEO was a single mom who'd seen the article about the trial and asked only one question in the interview. "You okay now?" He was. Not perfect, not untouched. But solid. We went out for drinks to celebrate, just the two of us. First time we'd done that in over a year. He ordered a whiskey neat. I raised an eyebrow. He grinned. "Don't worry. I sip now. Like an adult." "Scary," I said. "Next thing you'll be doing is budgeting." He laughed, but it faded into something gentler. "I didn't think I'd get to laugh again, Nick. Not like this." I knew what he meant. It wasn't just laughter. It was ownership of his own joy. Across town, Kristen was trying to rebuild too, but without the tools. She moved in with a cousin, picked up part-time work at a clinic. Word was, her parents were no longer speaking to each other. Patricia blamed Frank for allowing it all. Frank blamed Patricia for ignoring it. Neither blamed their sons. That told me everything. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. Neat, tidy. No return address. Inside, just a single page. "Nick, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I wanted to say thank you. For protecting him when I couldn't. I thought I was helping. I see now I was just avoiding. And I'll carry that. I hope one day Sophie knows the whole truth, and I hope she's proud of both her dads. K. No drama. No excuses. Just a quiet, late honesty." I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but record-keeping. Not every ending needs fire. Some just need closure. Thanksgiving came around. Ethan hosted. Small crowd, just me, him, Sophie, a couple friends from his support group, and Linda from his old job, who brought enough pie to bankrupt a bakery. No big speeches. No holiday theatrics. Just warmth. Sophie made paper dinosaurs wearing pilgrim hats. Ethan roasted a turkey that looked like it had been through counseling. I carved it while she narrated the process like a wildlife documentary. Here we see the uncle in his natural habitat, slicing the ancient meat beast. We laughed until we couldn't breathe. After dinner, Ethan pulled me aside. Quiet. I've been thinking about something, he said. About the last 7 weeks you spent in my life. I waited. You didn't just help me escape. You taught me how to come back. I don't think I would have known how to live in this house again. Not after what they did to it. I shrugged. It's just a house. He shook his head. No. It's not. It's the place my daughter gets to grow up with safety. With laughter. With silence that isn't dangerous. Then he handed me a key. What's this? Spare key. Just in case. You'll always be part of this. Not just the fight. The peace. It hit me harder than I expected. I took the key and nodded once. Later, when Sophie fell asleep on the couch, curled up against my side, I realized something. The real legacy I'd left behind wasn't revenge. It was safety. Ethan started smiling again in pictures. It hit me one night, scrolling through my phone. There he was, holding Sophie at a fall festival, laughing at something off camera. No shadows in his eyes. No tension in his shoulders. Just a man in his moment. I tapped on the photo, zoomed in, and stared for a while. This was the same guy who showed up at my door, broken and scared, barely able to speak. Now he was carrying cotton candy and winning stuffed dinosaurs for his daughter like trauma hadn't chewed through the last year of his life. That's the thing no one tells you about survival. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just waking up and not feeling sick from fear. Kristen hadn't reached out again. Not directly. But word was, she was trying to get unsupervised visits back. Her lawyer made noise. Ours made it disappear. The court wasn't moved. Not when the documentation was still sitting in a folder titled, When He Was Ethan. I had dinner with Ethan once a week now. Thursday nights. Sophie called it Uncle Noodle Night. Because I always brought pasta and she always talked me into silly dinosaur impressions. Ethan didn't say thank you every time. He didn't have to. We'd moved past survival. We were building something new now. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just someone's brother in the background. I was part of the foundation. It was a Tuesday when Ethan finally stepped back into his old neighborhood. Not to visit Kristen. Not for court. To help someone else. One of the guys from his support group, Ramon, was finally ready to leave. His abuser was a girlfriend. Controlling, manipulative, violent in quiet, terrifying ways. And he needed backup to collect his things. Ethan asked me to come. You were my spine when I didn't have one. I want to be that for someone else now. We met Ramon outside his apartment. The energy was heavy, like all the windows were holding their breath. She wasn't home. That was the plan. 30 minutes. In and out. Ramon packed fast. Shaky hands, quiet muttering. Ethan helped load the boxes. I handled the logistics. 3 bags, 2 boxes, a laptop, and a few precious things people forget they have the right to keep. Photos, journals, a blanket that still smelled like peace. Right before we left, Ramon looked at us and said, I thought being a man meant taking it. Turns out, it means walking away without shame. Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. Turns out being a man just means being human. That night, Ethan texted me one line. I finally feel useful again. And I just stared at it, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I wrote. You always were. They just convinced you otherwise. We didn't save the world that night. But we saved one man's. And that's how revolutions start. We got an invite in the mail. Not from Kristen. From Sophie's school. Parent and Hero Day. I stared at the wording. Not Mom and Dad Day. Not parent figures. Hero. Like someone in that school finally understood families aren't copy-paste. Ethan didn't want to go. Said he didn't want to make a scene. Said maybe Sophie would be embarrassed. That maybe another kid would ask where her mom was. I looked at him and said, Do you think she's embarrassed of the man who fought his way back to her? He didn't answer. But the next morning, he put on his nicest sweater and practiced his lines in the mirror like it was a TED Talk. When we got to the school, Sophie was waiting by the front gate. Hair braided. Little Dino backpack. When she saw us, she lit up like she'd swallowed the sun. She ran straight to Ethan. "I told them my hero was my daddy," she said. "And my almost daddy too," she added, wrapping her tiny arms around my leg. Inside, the kids took turns introducing their heroes. Firefighters. Nurses. An uncle who worked for NASA. Then Sophie stepped up. Nervous for a second. Then loud. "My hero is my daddy because he doesn't let the scary things win. And also my Uncle Nick, because he showed the scary things how scared they should be." The room chuckled. I felt my throat tighten. Afterward, a teacher pulled Ethan aside. Quiet voice. Gentle smile. "She's okay, you know," the teacher said. "Whatever happened, she's okay now." And Ethan just nodded. Later, in the car, he looked over at me. "She's gonna be fine." I smiled. "She already is." The last time Ethan saw Blake and Craig was in court, sentencing day. He almost didn't go. Said it felt like reopening a wound just to watch it bleed. But I reminded him. "You don't have to go for them. You go for you. You go to make sure the last page gets turned." So we sat in the gallery. Craig walked in first, already beaten down by months in holding. No swagger. Just slumped shoulders and court-issued shoes. He wouldn't meet Ethan's eyes. Blake came in second. He still had the weight room arrogance, but it was hollow now. A man whose bark had finally been measured against law and decency, and found small. The judge didn't go easy. He called them cowards. Predators. Said they were lucky Ethan hadn't pressed attempted murder. Blake rolled his eyes. Wrong move. The judge increased his sentence by 6 months, citing a continued pattern of arrogant, unrepentant behavior. Craig started to cry. When they were let out in cuffs, Ethan leaned forward slightly, just enough that Blake caught his eye. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there. Unbroken. And that was worse for Blake than any verdict. Outside, Ethan lit a match. Held it up. Then dropped it into a small tin bucket where a single piece of paper curled and burned. It was a copy of the emergency room intake form from the night he almost passed out from internal bleeding. "That's the last piece," he said. I watched the smoke rise into the clear sky. No eulogies for monsters. Just quiet justice. Spring came early that year. The kind of early that smells like new chances. Sophie planted sunflowers in Ethan's window boxes and named each one after a dinosaur. "That one's Steggy. That one's Spike. And that one's Kyle. He's the mean one." Ethan laughed so hard he nearly dropped the watering can. He'd started dating again. Slowly. Carefully. A woman named Tessa, who worked at the bookstore near his new office. She had quiet eyes and asked good questions. Never rushed him. Never flinched when he said hard things. He told her the truth, about the bruises, about the switch, about the trial. She didn't try to fix it. She just said, "I'm glad you got out." And sometimes that's all healing needs. Witnesses who don't ask for edits. Meanwhile, I found myself restless. Not in a bad way. Just aware that something was shifting. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't need me to hold the line. He could hold it himself. Sophie was thriving. Safe. Kristen had faded into distance, like a ghost no longer sure it haunted anyone. And me? I'd become the guy people called when things broke. Not just pipes or doors. Lives. I got 3 messages in 1 week from friends of friends. Husbands. Boyfriends. Sons. All of them asking the same thing in different words. "How did you do it? How do I get out?" So I started writing. Quietly. Anonymously. A blog. A resource. A voice. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even activism. It was the thing I wish someone had handed Ethan 2 years ago. A map out of hell. Summer came. Sophie turned 5. There was cake, dinosaurs, and laughter loud enough to shake loose every ghost in that house. Ethan stood by the grill with Tessa. Calm. Whole. I watched him laugh at something she whispered, and I knew he was living again. Not surviving. Not rebuilding. Living. Later, Sophie tugged my hand. "Uncle Nick," she said, "were you scared when the bad uncles came?" I crouched beside her. Yeah. But I was more scared of them winning. She nodded like that made perfect sense. "I'm glad you were brave." I smiled. Me too. Ethan joined us, dropping a paper crown on my head. King of backup plans? He said. Maybe I am. Because in the end, I didn't just trade places with my brother. I helped him trade shame for safety. Silence for strength. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being the backup. I became the reason the story didn't end in tragedy. And that's enough. The end.